There I am. Let me go back here. I want to acknowledge our elected official, Ivan J. Bates, for Baltimore City State's Attorney's Office. He took office at the beginning of January of 2023. The significance of that, as far as the impact on elder abuse in Baltimore City, is that he, as part of his campaign platform, made a priority to make sure that older adults and persons with disabilities who become victims of crime were given special attention so that they didn't get lost in the system. Crime victims are victims who also go through trauma. They're also trauma victims. And the reason we say they are trauma victims is because when we feel secure in our homes and in our communities, we thrive. And as we get older, we rely upon familiarity even more. We know our way to the one grocery store we like to go to. We go to Aldi's because the produce we can get it cheap and it's fresh and we like it there and we don't have to spend all our money. So we always go there. When things move around, when things change, that is where the discomfort comes. So when the routines are disrupted, we become uncomfortable. When people start leaving our lives through the loss of death or illness, and where people have to move out and go into assisted living, then that disrupts the flow of engagement for all older adults that are part of that personal community. Whatever scope of influence that one individual has, it affects many. So when somebody's home is broken into, when somebody trusts the wrong person and they lose their money, it can trigger a depression, and that trauma can trigger the onset of dementia that may have been slow. Now it's accelerated. Now that person can no longer remain in their home, and they no longer can provide for self-care. And it can happen fast. So one of the main things that Mr. Bates wanted to do was make sure that we put into place a unit that addressed some of the needs of our older adults when they become a victim of a crime. And so in September of 2026, I not only was the division chief of economic crimes, but we established a unit called the Older Adult and Disabled Persons Unit. And that we launched that and announced it to the public through a luncheon in which we hosted nearly 285 older adults aged 60 or older in the community surrounding area of Baltimore City. We launched a helpline and a toll-free help phone number where victims of crimes who were 60 years old or who live with disabilities could call and find out what was going on with their cases, could call and get questions answered about next steps of the process, assistance through the process, assistance with transportation during the process, and also in many cases, we could start getting them case management support services if they needed it. Perhaps they needed some assistance in getting some of the services that led them to be vulnerable. And if our goal is that in order to successfully prosecute cases of financial exploitation of vulnerable adults, to successfully prosecute abuse of vulnerable adults, to successfully prosecute embezzlement and fraud and theft schemes, we want to help the person who has been victimized to begin to heal as soon as possible. Because the stronger they are by the time they come to court to testify, the more comfortable they are to testify and the more equipped they are. And so our unit is hoping to be able to engage the older adults and persons with disabilities and address them and relate to them in a way that is best for them. One of the things that I didn't hear, I missed the first presentation this morning, but one of the things that strongly impacts the reporting of these types of cases is embarrassment, shame, humiliation, and depression. A person who has worked and been frugal and has been very conscientious about their funds all their life. Many of them have lived very simple lives and invested and saved. To lose that means that all the confidence they had in themselves of managing their own money, being independent, they lose that because now they feel like a failure. They feel like not that someone came in and lied to them and it's placing the fault on that person. They place the fault often on themselves. And because of that, they are too ashamed and too embarrassed to announce it. One of the examples you saw from the previous presenter was, how could you get to 300 million? Why wasn't it reported at 100 million? Because many people don't report the fraud. They don't believe it's fraud. They would prefer to continue to believe whatever story has been presented to them and whatever scenario that they adopted. They adopt it as their own truth. And they really don't want to believe differently. Because to believe differently means, one, their life savings is gone. Number two, they are humiliated, and their personal lifestyle is impacted. And so they kind of become the turtle pulled into their shell. And so we have to remove that shame and embarrassment from the experience. We can't give them back their money often, but we can try to do as much as we can to make the individual have and preserve their own dignity. It is tremendously offensive to me that someone would work all their lives for their earnings and someone would befriend them in their later years when it is the time for them to enjoy life and to have nothing but value come to them. And they end up feeling like a prisoner in their own home because they're afraid to trust anyone, they're afraid to go out, and they're afraid to tell anyone what happened. That to me is greatly egregious. And if I had my way, they would all have those life sentences, and no one would have 10-year sentences. But we have to educate our court systems as well. For example, in Baltimore City, what do you mostly hear about as far as crime in Baltimore City? What is your impression of Baltimore City crime? Carjackings, assaultive behaviors, shootings, murders, very violent crimes. We have more than enough. We could share with the rest of the jurisdictions, and we still would have more than enough, right? And because of that, Mr. Bates has to put a lot of his attorney manpower towards prosecuting those cases. He has to put the funding towards that. The mayor has to put funding towards trying to get the streets of Baltimore City safe. But when you think about how many older adults and persons with disabilities live in Baltimore City's community, that is a large population. It is unreasonable to believe that that population is not being impacted by fraud and deceit. It is unreasonable to believe that they are also not victims of human trafficking. What? Human trafficking for senior citizens? Yes. Benefits trafficking. Persons who are taken by a family member who is weary of caring for them to the hospital for care, they often will abandon them at the hospital. Even if they're coming from surrounding jurisdictions, they will drive them to Baltimore City. They will leave them at the hospital, and they don't always come back to get them. And they figure, well, they'll get them care because they have Social Security or disability benefits, but I can't deal with them anymore. And what happens is the hospital is ready to discharge the person because the medical crisis has been addressed, and somebody dressed very nicely, who is very polished, has a beautiful brochure, has visited the hospital and talked to the staff and said, we provide assisted living services. We have spaces open if you have anyone that needs to be discharged to a licensed facility. Here's our license. Sometimes it's active, sometimes it's fake, sometimes it has been suspended. But it is represented to the hospital as a licensed facility. And they end up taking that person to their facility. But fast forward, within 6 to 9 months, that person is no longer in that licensed facility. They are now being warehoused in a building where there is no on property staff. They are not getting their medications. They are not going to any doctor's appointments, and they're getting very, very, very basic meals and very, very, very basic and limited water access and public facility, restroom facilities. They get very little warm meals, and they don't get any change of clothing. They get no personal care. They are just being warehoused. And they can't leave, even if they want to. One, because many of those persons, remember, they've been abandoned by whoever was caring for them. They don't have other resources. They may not have other children. They may not have any family, or they may have already become estranged from them due to perhaps mental health issues or addiction. It may be alcohol or drug addiction history in their life. And so because of that, they are estranged from those who are blood relatives. So they have no one to call. And they don't have whatever money that they had from benefits and Medicare and Medicaid, because why? It's all been signed over to the assisted living manager. And nobody knows they're there. And nobody's coming to look for them. Yes, ma'am. Yes, a fiduciary, a payee, right? And so what can we do about this? Well, one of the things Mr. Bates is having us do is by forming the unit, the ODPU unit, one of the things that we are trying to do is not wait until the crime is reported, but to go out and educate and give safety tips and try to spread the word. What else is on every corner in Baltimore City? Well, there are liquor stores and there are churches. So if we go to the churches, who will you see there? You will always have, like in one church that I attend, we have the golden, whatever, they call them different things at different places, right? The golden angels, different things. If you go to your senior ministry, one of the questions I always have for them is, what happens when one of your members stops showing up? Do you go to find, do you do a check-in? Do you do a wellness check? Do you check on their welfare? Or do you feel that you are intruding on their privacy? Because everybody wants to be respectful. Do you make any home visits? Do you chat with your friend? I haven't seen you in a long time. You need any help, or is somebody helping you? That's a good question. Why is that a good question? Because they may say, my niece comes all the time and helps me. That's good. But then the next time they call, the niece answers the phone. She's not feeling well. The next time they call, the niece answers the phone. She can't come to the phone right now. Now this is a pattern. What do? Do you stop calling because you say, oh, honey, that family, they don't want nobody bothering them. So I leave it alone. I mind my business. Well, sometimes that's all you do. And why? Because you don't know what else to do. So our goal is to go out and talk to everybody we can reach at seniors, beginning with senior centers, then making our rounds to the churches. That's the goal in the next 2 years. And to talk to them about what they should be asking, questions they should be asking themselves, and questions they should be checking, how they could check in. Because there are reasons why so many of these types of crimes go unreported, even in the lower income community. It's not just wealthy older adults that are taken and bilked out of their savings. Many times they're taken from their just meager resources are stolen, their home, valuables that they have accumulated over time, their pensions are taken from them by somebody that befriended them or that they have known for years that has ingratiated themselves with them. It could even be somebody in the church or the pastor. And so checks and balances, right? When your community gets too small and too shrunken, that's when things begin to happen. So I am piggybacking on the previous discussion, but I wanted to let you know that that is what we are interested in. That's what we are working on, and those are the things we do. We're a very small unit, But we have the strong support of Mr. Bates, which we love and appreciate, because there have been previous administrations that said we got too much violent crime in Baltimore City. We really can't even pay attention to this. It's there, but we really can't pay attention to this. The same thing was going to happen when we go to court with these cases. The courts are going to say it's only white collar crime. It's only fraud. It's not violent crime. Nobody's bleeding. Nobody's dying. We have people dying in our streets. So when a courtroom comes up for a trial, and the defendant, first of all, the defendant is likely to get bail very quickly and be released to go home because they're not seen as posing a public safety issue. And and they are not considered flight risk often. Those are the two factors. Are you a flight risk? Are you likely to show up in court if you're released? And number two, are you continuing to be a danger to the public safety? That overrides detaining you before you're convicted. And so most of those cases with these types of charges, the person is released. Okay, when we come to trial and we go to take that to court and we say we want jail time because this person is just so, their behavior is too egregious, we're never going to recover all the money. And even if we did, that's not satisfactory. There has to be some accountability. The courts, even if they were likely to be willing to impose a sentence, if the defendant demands a trial and there is only one courtroom open and available to begin a trial that day, and there is someone who's charged with murder who's been detained for 60 to 90 days, and they're waiting for their trial, and my case of fraud or embezzlement is waiting, who's getting the courtroom first? The murder charge, because they have a constitutional right to a speedy trial. That's quite understandable. But when that happens 3 times, 4 times, and now it's been a year, what is the impact on that victim who probably didn't sleep the night before or the week before because they're 78 years old and now they've got to go to court and tell their story about how they were embarrassed and ashamed, and also they can't pay their bill collectors and maybe lost their home over this and they're devastated because it was a home that they and their spouse spent 30 years paying off, and they lost it, and now they're living in a back bedroom in their child's apartment. So they feel they have no command and control over their environment anymore. Their world has gotten smaller, and they've gotten no justice, so they can kind of put it to rest and move on because it's a year and they're sitting waiting for this to happen. So when we try to get them services and support, part of that reason is to build a relationship with them and to expand their space again, expand their contacts, so that they're in a better state of mind. And here's an example, and then I'm going to move on to identity fraud, what I'm here for. And it won't take that long, but here's one of my examples. I had a lady who, she was a school teacher. Her parents were school teachers. She was the only child. Parents liked to collect art. They had a beautiful big home in the city, and she grew up in that house. When her parents passed away, she lived in that house, and now she's come to an advanced age. She had some arthritis, some trouble with moving around, and a neighbor started coming around and helping her with errands. And before you know it, they told her, listen, if we can't get you to the bank one day when you want to go, why don't you get a debit card, and that way we can, you can get your money even if we can't take you to the evening when we get back from work. She didn't really want to do it. She wasn't interested in ATM cards and debit cards. But she agreed with it. She had to pick a PIN number. The bank teller sat there and listened to the neighbor talk to her about what PIN number she should pick. She never noticed that the card never came. Well, the card never came because the neighbor was checking the mail, intercepted it, set up an online bank account, a mobile account, which of course she didn't want because she does her banking in person. She didn't know a mobile account had been set up for her, and money started going missing and she didn't realize it. She was very loath to report it, but she had a family lawyer. He really impressed upon her it had to be reported. We talked to her. She was very loath to go forward. She was very hesitant, and her response to me was, well, if I do this, he'll be mad at me. What if he gets angry? And two, who will help me if I do this? At least he's helping me. Her lawyer, over a 6-month period, kept encouraging her off and on. He was a family lawyer for a lot of years, to think about going to visit some assisted living facilities. He finally convinced her to move into one. She gave up the house. And when I went to visit her at the assisted living to prepare for trial, I said, "Do you remember Mr. So-and-so, her neighbor?" She said, "Of course I do. He stole my money." Her personality and her approach to it changed. Why? Because now she was in a safe place. She had a set of, he couldn't reach her. She didn't need him. And she told me, "Listen, how long is this interview going to take? Because my friends are coming and we always meet at 12:15 to go to lunch. And I'm not missing my commitment. My friends will be looking for me." So she had built relationship. She had her routines, and she was perfectly competent to testify. She had no mental incapacities. She just wasn't vulnerable as much anymore. And that made a big difference for her. And that made a big difference in us getting a plea agreement and not even having to call her to testify. So that is a demonstrative example of how building community, building relationship can help a victim recover enough to have their justice. I wanted to go over some of the crimes that we see with identity fraud and identity theft, and how does that play in with just vulnerable adults, but also the community at large. Well, some of the crimes that are specifically articulated in the statute include when a name, an address, telephone number, driver's license, social security number, place of employment, employee identification number, and so on are used. Look at this. Even just knowing the mother's maiden name can get a fraudster on the path to assuming your identity, applying for credit in your name, making purchases in your name that can cause you a lot of debt and a lot of credit loss, to the point where you now can't finance a car, you can't finance a house. And even creditors are looking for you to pay back debts that you didn't know even existed. There's also the payment device number, which means like your PIN number, as in my example I gave you where it was the debit card and the PIN number. Another way that they can do identity fraud is obtaining personal identifying information without consent. A person may not knowingly, willfully, and with fraudulent intent possess, obtain, or help another to possess or obtain any personal identifying information of an individual without the consent of the individual. And here's the key. What is consent? Hard to prove for us, especially if there is any illness, any absence of the person. Say there's a young man with learning disabilities and he has a designated payee, and that designated payee realizes that when that person turns 21, they are going to inherit their parents' property and its substantial assets. They may be just a designated payee, but now they realize there's an advantage in becoming a power of attorney. And they may come to the notary to have all that notarized. And so now you have one or two things may happen. That young man may not be brought before you. His signature might be already on there. And she says, I already have his power of attorney, but we need a new one that's broader. He's never had any power of attorney because the designated payee is not the same thing. Or she may bring him there, but may never leave him in the room with you alone, may not allow him to speak directly to you or ask any questions. And he communicates very little. He just follows instructions. Those are red flags. And if you, as a notary, decide none of this is my business, and I'm just here to certify that this person has an ID, they showed up in front of me, and they signed. That's all my function is. Then you are doing a disservice to the integrity of your profession, and you are doing a disservice to the community. And I am here to encourage you, please look beyond that, because that could be your brother, that could be your sister, that could be your family member. You can't, I realize it is not your duty to go into the minute details, but it is I think, reasonable to ask you to have that person speak for themselves if they can communicate. Because if they can't communicate, how can they actually be consenting to whatever they're signing, right? So it's fair and reasonable for you to say, I need to talk to him. Or, man, why don't you step out and have a seat in the reception for just a minute. I want to speak to each person separately for just 5 minutes. Where do you live? Who is this other person to you? Do you know why we're here? Those are reasonable questions, not overly intrusive. And if you have the same routine all the time, you can testify, if necessary, of the state of that person. Did the person look disheveled and confused, lost? Did they look frail and vulnerable, like you would say usually to a person if you saw them on the street? Are you okay? Do you need help? If those go off in your head, those are red flags to you, right? If you feel like you would ask that person, do they need help? Then maybe we need to, as the previous presenter said, slow it down just a minute, because just getting the business so that you do the notary is not enough. Keeping your business at a high level of integrity and accountability builds your reputation in the community and makes you more reliable. Don't sacrifice it for any one business transaction. Assuming the identity of another. Often people will assume the identity of another. I have a story for that, but I'm going to get to that in a second. I'm almost done. The penalties for some of these things, when the person gets benefit, credit, goods, service, health information, health care, or other things of value, has the value of, if it's $1,500 to $25,000, it's a penalty of maximum penalty of 5 years and $10,000 fine. And in addition to that fine, there can be an order of restitution to make the victim whole. The fine is on top of that. $25,000 to $100,000 a loss. It's a felony with 10 years maximum penalty and $15,000. As you can notice, these penalties don't sound like that high. If you've taken $100,000 from a person, the maximum penalty is 10 years. Think about that. When I first started 27 years ago working in the state's attorney's office, it was the theft penalties were over or under $500. If you stole over $500, it was 25 years. Straight up. That was it. It was a felony. Under 500 was a misdemeanor. Over was, and our state legislature has changed the dollar amounts twice, I believe. Might be 3 times, but I think it's twice since then. And so now I have to go look this up every time because they changed it. Pardon me?
I said, you know why? They're mostly the ones that's being shot.
No comment, but I can't say you're wrong. But it's because of how our legal culture is looking at financial loss. They're not seeing it as how much impact it can have on the lives of the citizens, and it's serious. 100,000 to some people may not be much, or 80,000, but it may be all that it took somebody their whole life to save. It may be the life insurance policy from their child who was in a car accident and died. And so that money means even more because now they've lost that, and it was the life of their child. My son died for me to have this life insurance, and I thought it would be, I would make a memorial for him one day, and now it's gone. So there are things like that are not measured by the statute, to be honest with you. And we try to supplement it with their other identity fraud and other credit card fraud charges that can be added on. We add on what we can add on often. If it's over 100,000, then it could be 20 years and 25,000. So for a misdemeanor, anything between 100 and 1,500. Well, that doesn't sound like a lot, but for some people, it may be what they have. I don't know about you, but if somebody were going to hand me 1,500 right now, I'd take it. I would not think that was a small thing. I wouldn't think that was a small thing to get an extra $1,500 in my pocket. That's like, oh, well, my goodness, thank you, why? All right, so if it's, why is it a misdemeanor? Because that's not really a small thing. $100, yeah, that might be, okay, it's $100 one way or another. I scratch off and I got $100. But $1,500, that's pretty good. And it is substantial enough that it should be taken seriously. One of the cases that I took a look at in preparation for coming today was one case, Poole versus Hyatt. And in that, the courts came out and said it's generally the rule that if a party executing an instrument knows that he's before an officer having the authority to take acknowledgments, understands that that officer, which would be you as the notary, is present for the purpose of taking his acknowledgement, intends to do whatever is necessary to make the instrument effective, and acknowledging officer's official certificate is attached thereto, then such acknowledgement, in the absence of fraud, will be conclusive in favor of those who, in good faith, rely upon it. What does all that mean? It means that if I show up and I bring a document to you to be notarized, and I rely upon that notarized document later, that when it is challenged in court, say there is a dispute over a transference or conveyance of a deed or a will, and the execution of a will, it is likely the courts are not going to disturb it if the document is notarized. So that means you're really, really, really a very important gatekeeper. That authenticity of what happened is extremely important. Extremely important. It is not a small thing when you notarize something. You are putting a stamp of authenticity and validity on a legal instrument. And it has been very difficult often to have that overturned in court. And there has been a variance in the success of any overturns. Oops. Although a clear oral expression is preferable because it provides direct evidence of the signatory's knowledge and intent, when a signatory appears personally before a notary for the purpose of having the notary witness and attest to his or her signature, the signatory appears to be alert, is under no apparent duress, or undue emotional intoxicating influence. Well, you're not going to know if it's intoxicating if you're not observing how they're standing, if you're not close enough to get a smell of maybe alcohol, if you're not, and you may even have to say, if they look a little confused, do you usually take medication, sir? Did you have your medication today? How are you feeling today? You can just, in small talk, say, how are you feeling today? You know, those are things that we sometimes, what I'm going to say to you is that fraudsters are very nice people. They're very nice. They're very engaging. They speak with authority. They speak with intention. And as you just saw in the previous presentation, we could team up, I'm just telling you. That here's one of my sayings I have been saying for a lot of years because I get in trouble. A lot of times when I call my cases in court and there are other lawyers there, sometimes I get stopped at the door as I leave, like, why are you charging that old lady with a crime? Why are you beating up on that old lady? And it's usually because she stole money from an even older lady. Old does not mean good. Old does not, and I'm 61, so I'm.
You're looking day over 25.
See, the money is coming, honey. I respond to that, but the old does not mean integrity. It doesn't mean honest. It doesn't mean trustworthy. People presume that older person is not a thief and not a liar. But the one thing about a thief that I have found over the years, they usually do not get redeemed. They don't rehabilitate because it's part of their character. They're untruthful. I have prosecuted a forger who liked to pass bad checks, and he did 10 years in jail. When he got out, he executed a new scheme. He got arrested. He served another 8 years. When he got out, he executed another one and ran into me, and he stole $180,000 from liquor companies by forging a fake liquor license, faxing it to them so that they would, if there's any blurred lines and things, the liquor companies were like, well, it's fax, it's not going to be a clean, crisp copy. And he would do a cash-on-demand delivery orders and order large quantities, and then he would go and have auctions in the communities among the local bars and sell it for cheap because it was straight cash in his pocket. Where did he have it delivered? To his brother's church in the basement.
Wow.
How did he pay for it cash on delivery? With a check that bounced. But by the time the checks bounced for $60,000, $40,000, $25,000, he had moved on to the next liquor distributor, and there were like about 3 or 4 of them. And by the time he made his rounds, it was 4 months later, and he had $180,000 of goods. The judge was like, Miss Green, he's an older man. Why are you doing this? I said, because Judge, he's been doing this all his life, and he's not going to stop. And the bottom line is he needs to go to jail. He said, well, the liquor companies should have been smarter about it. They're big corporations. What's the big deal? At one point, I had over 100 exhibits. And at one point, the judge stopped me and said, this is overkill. I said, no, it's not. I said, it's showing that he had all the means and ability in his house to make these fake checks. No, I'm not letting you put any more evidence in. And he was a very small, short, unassuming dude. Didn't look like any guy. You could see him. If he said good morning to you, you say good morning. You wouldn't be afraid. He was not scary. And you know what? The judge was angry with me because he had to sentence him to jail. And so fast forward 4 years later, he brought him back in and modified his sentence and released him against my objections. Because he said it's a corporation, they should have known better.
So do you have your eyes on him?
Pardon me?
You have your eyes on him. He's going to do it again.
Oh, he probably will do it again. I don't have the time to track him. What I do, if you must know, what I do that most people don't do, when I place somebody on probation, I remind them, I have 30 years to retirement. I'm not going anywhere. So I am going to check, and I do show up at violation of probation hearings for my cases. To the point where the attorneys that usually handle collateral hearings, which are the violation of probation hearings, if it is an economic crime case, they will call me or email me and say, Shari, are you coming on for your case yourself? And most of the time I'm like, yes, I'm coming myself. Because I remember the facts. Everybody else has forgot the facts, and they see this poor schmo standing before them that looks pitiful, and they go, he's no harm to the community. Or even if I didn't have that judge release him, you know what would have happened? The jail would have said, listen, it's COVID in 2019, 2020. We've got violent criminals in here that we can't release. We've got to thin out the population because it is a statewide health emergency. We've got to do what we've got to do. He would be one of the very first to be released because it's white-collar crime, it's a non-violent, it's a property crime offense. They're the first to go out the door. They're the first to be paroled. So even if I, as the state, agree to a probation agreement, the Division of Corrections can parole early. But I show up when they violate it. And then they have to go back and they have to get all the extra time that they didn't do because I show back up again. So why is that relevant to you? One, it's hard to catch them. It's hard to do, but it's important. And I think it's important. I'm doing my part, and I want you guys to pay attention and do your part. Because if you don't, what happens is once it's signed, it's effective, and it's hard to overcome it. In the one case, Ultimate Title LLC versus Ladd, the son, Mr. Ladd Jr., forged his father, Ladd Sr.'s signature in order to sell a property the father owned to K1 without his consent. Ladd Jr. impersonated his father via email with the title company and was able to obtain seemingly legal notarized documents to complete the sale. Seemingly. The notarial officer was located in Baltimore County and failed to verify that Ladd Jr.'s name or his driver's license as he was a friend of her boyfriend and she trusted him. So when you have your notarial hat on, you have no family and friends, right? Because it's your name. Preserve your name and your integrity. Because you would assume that that person who is your friend or your boyfriend's friend would never dupe you. Yes, ma'am.
Question about this case. Just making a few assumptions here. Assuming the father bought the property before he had the son, it would not have had, the generation on there. So, I see a couple of things the notary did wrong, but how is the notary to know that the property is either the dad's or the son's if the name is effectively the same?
Well, it would have the senior junior on it, but this looks like the girl didn't even have him come and show his ID, right?
Yeah.
But if you can't tell, that may be one you can't notarize. I may need 2 proofs of ID. I may need you to bring the original document and verification. Also look at the dates. If dad bought the property in 1989 and the son was born in 1992, and you're looking at look at the driver's license. Can I see your license? Well, if his license says that he was born in 1967, he's not going to look like he's born in 1967, right? So he's going to go on his name and probably not have the junior written down there, right? But then do some math with the years. See if that is telling, if that gives you the clues you need. If it is cloudy, if it's unclear, what do you do about notarizing? Because, why? You can't verify the correct persons are before you. Bottom line. Moreover, Ladd Sr. lived in Delaware, but his son chose to use a Baltimore County notary. Neither the title company or the notary noticed that the son was a junior with the same name as his father. The company that was supposed to have bought the land lost money and resources as the court found the deed to be void. The title was never transferred to K1. K1 relied in good faith both on the title company because they figured the title company's looking out for them, right? That's one of the reasons the title company is there, to assure the integrity of the transaction. And they relied on that and the truthfulness of the notarized document. That's, once again, we rely upon what you're verifying. It is extremely. The court found the company liable for failing to authenticate the signatures even on the notarized documents and ensured that Ladd Sr. was an active participant in the sale. I would be very afraid that this might not always happen, that the burden would go to the company. But the company got screwed all the way around. Should we be like my one judge and say, well, it's a company, that's their fault?
No.
I don't think so. I think that truthfulness and integrity should matter. The signature found, this is a best case scenario and is not the usual outcome. In Iglesias versus Pentagon Title, generally a title company has no duty to confirm the signature of a facially valid and notarized legal document. So the title company now relied upon you. Notarized documents are generally considered to be facially valid. A negligence claim ought not to lie against a lender and closing attorney who, in good faith, relied upon a notarized power of attorney, unbeknownst to them, to contain a forged signature of the donor of the power, permit a deed of trust executed by the purported attorney in fact to be recorded. Unless there are facts that raise a red flag or cast doubt on the facially valid notarized document, the title company cannot be held liable. That would be like if one was Reginald and the other one was Richard. Green, and the addresses didn't match up, and the numbers were off. One said 1825, and the next one said 2518. Things like that are very obvious. If those were there, then that might make it facially recognizable and still transfer some liability onto the title company. Okay, being part of the solution. Your requirements are pretty clear, what you have to put in there and what you don't have to put in there, but what more can be done? Ask for more than one form of identification. Always verify the name on the driver's license. That means slow down. Because sometimes in communicating pleasantries and chatter, you miss the details of what you're focusing on, right? So sometimes you have to, be nice, be pleasant, but then you have to silence all the other stuff that's going on in the room so that you can see it. Be consistent in your practices. That's the part. If you always ask, do you know what, I always meet with each person first. I always ask them, do they know what they're doing and what these documents are for? Do they have any medical requirements that they take medication? Did they have their medication that day? Are they feeling okay? Are they comfortable signing this? Once I've talked to both persons, where do you live, sir? Because sometimes it doesn't match what the driver's license says. How long have you lived there? What is this person to you? Basic questions, however you want to formulate them, but once you come up with what you want to do to verify identity, be consistent with it every single time. Why? Because if I have to call you as a witness, and I know you don't want to do it, but if I call you as a witness to prove that a person perpetuated a fraud, I would love for you to be able to say, I don't have an exact memory of everything, but what I can tell you is I always ask the same questions the same way, and I take my time. I always make sure I look them in the eye, that I look how they're dressed and I look how they're, not to judge them, but to make sure that they look like they came here on of their own will and that they're comfortable. Yes. I noticed that this was a 20-some-year-old man, and so I knew that they couldn't be the father who bought the property in the 1950s or 1960s. You can testify to that because why? You have consistent practices that are established that you always do. Keep the physical record. Do not say, I'll fill it in later. Do not ever let that thought come into your head that you will fill it in later because somebody's rushing. Please fill in your records as they are there. Fill it in before they walk away. Why? Because as you're filling it in, you may realize you need to ask another question. Fill it in, and then it's done. Always fill it in consecutively. Please keep your records. Ask the person why they are in need of your service, as I said before. These are all part of becoming a part of the solution and not the problem. My last example, I had a gentleman who bought a property at a tax sale in Baltimore City. The city was owed water bills and tax money. Bought it at the tax sale. The next part of the process is basically they bought the lien. They paid the lien. What was the lien from the city? The city was owed $300 for the water bill, and they was owed something for property taxes. Okay, he paid that up. He does not have a clear deed. He has a lien now. He now should, as the next step, notify the original owner of that property and say, I have the lien on this property. You can either sign the property over to me in lieu of paying the debt, or you can pay off the debt. You have this amount of time to do it. This guy didn't want that. He wanted the property. So what he did was he signed the lien, the deed over to himself, went to his local bank, talked to his bank teller who had seen him come in month after month, and she's like, oh yeah, that's one of our customers. Let me help him. And she notarized that document that had two persons' signature on there, but only one person showed up. We pulled the security camera. Only one person ever showed up, and it was this gentleman who wanted to transfer that deed, and he filed that deed. I took him to court because I charged him with theft of the property. He got on the stand, and because he is an unscrupulous gentleman, just like he lied about the notarization, he also got on the stand and lied and said he knew that the owner of the property, that they were high school friends, and that he was lying, and he gave him that because he owed him a debt. The owner got in and said, I don't know this man. But he had no way to prove. How do you prove a negative that you don't know the person? They found him not guilty because the jury did not want this man to be criminally indicted and convicted and go to jail for something like this. They felt this was a civil dispute, and they couldn't tell who was right and who was wrong, but they weren't sending anybody to jail for it. Bottom line, because of that, the owner of the property could not get his property back because it was deeded to the other person, it was notarized, and he could not get his property back. And I had no good answers for him.
And what did you say about who the notary was? Or where he got it notarized at?
He got it notarized at Bank of America at a local branch, and the lady was one of the assistant managers, and she's like, oh, he was one of our customers. I put her on the stand. She didn't want to testify because she knew she made a mistake. Her book was not up to date. It was not thorough. And she just signed it and notarized it for him and thought she was providing a service to her customer. That's how she saw her duty. She was mistaken. Her duty is to be accurate as a notary. When she put the notary hat on, she was no longer a Bank of America employee providing a service to a customer. Now she's a notary. Take it seriously because it was her name. It was her that I had to put on the stand. It was her embarrassment. So that is one of the worst cases I ever had that I lost. I haven't lost that many, to be honest with you. And I'm not bragging because I don't take cases to court if I don't think I have solid evidence. But that one was a devastating loss for me because I felt I really had not helped this man. And he was renovating the property. And so he wasn't occupying it. And he went to go do more work on it and the locks were changed. That's how he discovered that somebody had took his property. He's not the only one. It's happened multiple times in Baltimore City, and there are no laws against it. There's a big loophole, and the only barrier is if somebody doesn't notarize it, and that she notarized it. She only had one person in front of her. She should have never notarized it.
I mean, the question I'm going to ask, and then you did say it was they wanted to go to a civil case. Being that they had the tape to show that only one person was there and what her obligation was, they didn't have any recourse with Bank of America. She was acting on the behalf of Bank of America as an official, employee of Bank of America. So I was just wondering.
I encouraged him to seek civil remedies, and as you know, this is a person who was flipping homes and had his own full-time job and was just trying to build something for his family in the future, to own some properties. It's not like he had deep pockets. Civil litigation is extremely expensive, which was a barrier for him in trying to sue this gentleman. I don't know if he would prevailed. He was trying the last and this was several years ago. But that was his only other alternative, was to go to Bank of America and say, your employee did this wrong. We want her to be liable on him for our loss. But that may be the only way to get the deed overturned from my research at that time was to have a court finding saying that the deed was transferred using fraud. And because I lost the case, I did not get that ruling. The deed was not overturned. It was not voided. Suing, he might have recovered losses, but that doesn't mean he would get the property back, but he might have at least got his losses back for his investment in the property. So that's how severe it can be for being quick and in a rush. So my advice to you is if you're in a rush and you don't have time, then maybe you're not ready to take that client that day. They had to come back. Thank you all so very much for giving me an opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you, Nicole, for thinking of me. And just know that in Baltimore City, we're trying to do something about these kinds of things. And we count on you. We really count on you to keep really good records, because that's how we track the fraud. A lot of times we'll be coming knocking at your door, and we're not trying to harm you. We're just trying to find out the records and what happened when the person showed up, because it may help us prove the fraud. Thank you.